Session Update, I'm Shannon Lurkey. Governor Mark Dayton, DFL lawmakers and high school students who participated in the March for Our Lives event in Washington, D.C., called a press conference to urge lawmakers to quickly pass bills intended to reduce gun violence before the legislative session ends. Following the press conference, Governor Dayton took questions from the media on a variety of topics. Here's that event.
Last week, I met with students from Henry Sibley High School who had been to Washington, and they are joined today by a couple students from Minneapolis North High School, and they wanted to know what else they could do to keep pushing the legislation forward where there's so much resistance in the House and Senate Republican caucuses to sensible, common sense gun control legislation. There are a couple comments that I found particularly disturbing made this last week. One legislator said, "Yesterday after we got done debating on the floor, I made it home just in time to speak to a college class on government affairs. But after 45 minutes of asking and answering questions, I finally had to ask the students in that college a question. And these students range from 17 to about 30 years old. I finally asked them, is there anybody concerned about current gun laws? And none of them said they were concerned. Minnesota gun laws are very good." I think we have some students here who have something to say about that. Another legislator was dismissive of students demonstrating for gun control. Quote, "The signs are fun, the parades are fun, but when you really ask them questions, they really don't have a base of knowledge. I would just ask them to do a little more research. We have a high percentage of gun ownership in my district, and they don't want to see their rights infringed upon." Well, the common sense legislation that we're proposing, and Senator Latz and Representative Portman here have championed in their respective bodies, is supported by 90% of Minnesota, according to a recent poll, that requires a criminal background check on every gun sale. The same thing we already require and have for years on gun sales by licensed gun dealers. We're just closing the loophole that allows people who couldn't pass one of those criminal background checks to go to a gun show or go to a private sale and to get those guns with no safety protections whatsoever. It's just an obvious common sense measure. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled it does not violate anybody's Second Amendment rights, which is clearly not my intent, or I believe anybody else's. But it protects these young people when they go into their schools. And anybody says they haven't done research doesn't understand that they do research every day when they walk into those schools and put their lives on the line. So I urge the legislature to back this common sense of 90% of Minnesotans and vote to pass this legislation, also the red flag legislation. And as you know, I sent yesterday a letter to the House and Senate leaders asking them to take action. Enough hiding behind committees and motions. Time to take action and act on behalf of the people of Minnesota. So that Jorge Hernandez is going to be our first speaker from Henry Sibley. Jorge.
Hi, I'm Jorge Esparza Hernandez. I'm a high school senior at Henry Sibley High School and part of MN Never Again, a new organization entirely run by students solely devoted to reducing gun violence in Minnesota. Thank you, Governor Dayton, for having us here today. We appreciate your advocacy on an issue that directly affects each and every one of us every day. Most people don't see Minnesota as a very violent place. We're known for Minnesota nice. Unfortunately, that's just an assumption. Here's what the data says. In the last decade of available data, 673 Minnesota residents were murdered with guns, and an additional 83 died in accidental shootings or shootings of undetermined intent. In Minnesota, African Americans are 12 times more likely to be victims of gun violence than their white counterparts. 78% of gun-related deaths in Minnesota in the last decade were suicides. And gun violence is costing Minnesotans $764 million annually. Despite these staggering statistics, our legislature has done nothing, and that is unacceptable. To legislators who have done nothing on this issue, We demand that you take our lives seriously and pass common sense gun laws, or common sense gun violence prevention legislation. We demand you take action to pass red flag laws to keep dangerous weapons away from dangerous people. We demand that you stand up to the NRA and support legislation that 90% of Minnesotans support. Because if you don't, we will vote you out. Now I'd just like to turn it over to Elliot.
Thank you, Jorge. My name is Elliot Gunderman, and I am a junior at Patrick Henry High School in North Minneapolis. I have been a leader in the gun control movement at my school and in my community. With the help of many generous donors, I was selected as one of 8 students from the North Side to take an all-expenses-paid trip to Washington, D.C. for the March for Our Lives. As a resident of the North Side, gun violence hits close to home. As a resident and student of Henry High School, it's even closer. On February 27th, only 13 days after the shooting at Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida, Patrick Henry experienced a code red lockdown. Reports of a man with a gun near the school had been placed, and it was believed that he attempted to escape police by coming into the school building. He did come into the building, leaving 300+ students and staff fearing for their lives. I received messages from several friends saying that they weren't sure what was going on and they didn't know if they would make it out alive. I was panicking, and I wasn't even there. I had no family members in the building. I can't even imagine being a parent of a student in the building at the time. Thank God no shots were fired. No one was hurt, but the students and staff at Henry were still shaken. It's time to wake up. Do something. Las Vegas, AR-15. Orlando, AR-15. Sandy Hook, AR-15. Sutherland Springs, AR-15. Stoneman Douglas High School, AR-15. Do you see the pattern? Semi-automatic weapons, including the AR-15 and similar guns, have been commonly and repetitively used in the most deadly and most recent American shootings. No matter where you stand on gun control, young people in America, including myself, are asking you, am I next? Will my classmate be the next one to legally purchase an AR-15, a weapon used in the war in Afghanistan, and use it against their classmates? When I was in DC, the resounding demands I heard was for a ban of possession and sales of semi-automatic weapons to the public, banning of sales and possession of bump stocks, and background checks on all gun sales, including those at gun shows. As students in America, we shouldn't have to focus on if we will have a code red tomorrow. We should be focused on our grades, college entrance exams, and our future. Without gun control, that won't be possible. Not one more. Thank you for your time, and I'd like to introduce Joe.
Hi, my name is Joe Weichert. I'm a cellist, a swimmer, and a senior at Henry Sibley High School. And I've had enough. If the school shooting in Parkland has taught us anything, it's that incidents like that can happen anywhere, at any time. And despite what people may think, conversation about gun violence and school shootings is rampant in school hallways. Last month, a member of our community was shot and killed outside of a theater that I go to all the time. We are all still scared, and we need to make a change. Now. We're thankful to Governor Dayton for his leadership in helping make schools safer in Minnesota. But we need more. We need the legislature to act. We urge the legislature to pass a common sense gun violence prevention bill, one that is supported overwhelmingly by Minnesotans, and send it to the governor for his signature. In a meeting last week, he promised to sign it. In fact, he promised us that he would sign 10 of them if they would just get in front of him. We would also like to specifically call on Governor Dayton to veto Bill HF 4473 without a corresponding gun violence prevention bill with it. Alone, it does absolutely nothing to keep dangerous weapons away from dangerous people. 2018 is the first year that millennials will make up the largest block of voters in this country. And rest assured, we are ready and able to take action. To legislators who hide behind the NRA and choose to do nothing, we have one message. We will vote you out. And now I'd like to turn over the floor to Senator Latz.
Well, thank you. I'm Senator Ron Latz, DFL-St. Louis Park, and I'm humbled and honored to be here with the students who made the trip to Washington and who continue their advocacy to reduce gun violence in the schools and across our communities. I'm proud that my daughter was also in attendance in Washington, D.C., and she came back energized and moved by what she heard there. And what's most important is being able to translate that message back to our communities individually, to our schools, to our neighborhoods, to our neighbors, and right now, to our legislators. I want the members of the House of Representatives to know, and the members of the Senate to know, that in 2 weeks, assuming that we adjourn in 2 weeks and our work is all done, this issue is not going to end. This issue is going to persist through the elections in November, and for the Senate, it will still be persisting through our elections in 2020 if action is not taken. Those of you who've been around the Capitol for a long time know that in the next 2 weeks, there's going to be a lot of stuff going on. There is plenty of time left to pass legislation that will make a real difference. The criminal background check based on the permit to purchase process is one such bill. I want to emphasize it is not a universal background check bill. It does not cover family transfers. It does not cover a variety of 8 exceptions that are in there for specific circumstances, and does not cover all firearms. It does not cover the long guns that are commonly used in hunting, shotguns and rifles. But it does cover the AR-15s, which are the military-style assault weapons. It does cover all pistols, and those are covered in existing law if you're going to buy at least the pistols from licensed dealers. What's important about it is it closes the gap. It closes the loophole for transactions that occur at the gun shows or happen private to private, or when persons meet online to make a decision to buy and sell either a pistol or an assault weapon. Those are huge loopholes, anywhere from 20 to 40% of all transactions happen in that way. You know, the Senate passed an education bill the other day, which included background checks for all personnel in our public schools. Now, if I had introduced an amendment that said you can exclude 40% of the personnel in public schools from going through these background checks, do you think there would have been any member of the Senate would have voted for that? I doubt it. Similarly, we've got bills coming up that involve health professionals. We have existing laws that cover health professionals. If I introduced a bill or an amendment that said 40% of those who would otherwise have to go through background checks, if they work in an assisted living facility, they work in a hospital, in a nursing home, 40% don't have to go through the criminal background check, do you think anyone would vote for that? Are they going to allow people who have been convicted of assault, domestic assault, assault of vulnerable adults to go work in an assisted living facility or a nursing home? Wouldn't they absolutely insist on taking the minimal step of a background screening to see if they've got a criminal record that would prohibit them from working in such a facility? Well, of course they would want that background screening done. But for some reason, they refuse to go forward with a background screening for the 40% or so of gun sales that happen in Minnesota. It just does not make any sense to me. And I also want to throw something out there with these 2 bills that were introduced in the House the other day. They are fig leaves. Don't let those become fig leaves for action when they will accomplish next to nothing in terms of preventing gun violence in our state. If anyone wants to go into more detail about those, I'm happy to do that. But the only reason they've been introduced is because the majority in the House decided they need to do something because of the pressure from the kids that are behind me and the other kids across our state. And they're trying to inoculate themselves against backlash in the fall elections. But we're not going to let that happen because these bills will do almost nothing, and in some cases might be detrimental to protecting the public safety. So with that said, I appreciate the students that are here today, and I want to introduce our minority leader in the House, Representative Hortman.
Well, we are so inspired by the students from across the state of Minnesota and the citizens who have come to the Capitol. On the first day of session, the Capitol was packed with thousands of people demanding action, common sense gun violence prevention measures. On the second day of session, Representative Dave Pinto, DFLer from St. Paul, moved for immediate consideration of 2 common sense measures supported by 90% of Minnesotans, including responsible gun owners. The 2 measures we've worked really hard on in the Minnesota House are criminal background checks and extreme risk protective orders. These are 2 measures we know would make a difference and that students and other concerned citizens are demanding action on. Unfortunately, the Republicans in the House of Representatives have blocked any action on this legislation at all this session, with the Speaker making very clear that nothing will happen to prevent gun violence in Minnesota under his watch. Well, in Minnesota, we graduate more than 60,000 kids from high school every year. These students have the possibility of determining the entire election, who we elect as governor, who we put in control in the Minnesota House, and who we elect to the U.S. Senate. And I think that they're looking for people who are willing to take action on gun violence prevention. When citizens cry out, legislators should listen and respond. And they're making it clear that if we don't, they will take action.
Questions on this subject?
I'd like to ask any one of the students with respect to the finding that Senator Latz's legislation was found not to be germane. I know that's a common tactic. The legislators accept it as just the way things are done. Well, what's your impression of that? Those bills were refused to be included in an omnibus bill because they were ruled in a public safety bill not to be germane. I'd like to have one of you students tell me what you think about that.
Stand up and together.
What does it tell you about the way things are done here, essentially?
Well, we have obviously not seen any change happen anywhere on a state level, on a federal level, and I think that you know, we can talk about individual things that people have done, but for the most part, we just need to see change. And anything that isn't change, anything that isn't comprehensive, common sense gun legislation, we just can't accept.
Have any of you students been in touch with any of your peers not here in the metro? I mean, the schools where you guys come from, every one of your elected officials who you can vote for, I think, basically agrees with you. But in rural Minnesota and elsewhere is where you get the disagreement. I don't know if any of you have been in touch with your colleagues elsewhere about that.
Well, 2 parts to this answer. We have been trying to get in touch with everyone here in Minnesota. I know that even just out here, we were getting contact information from North and Henry. So we are working to make sure that we involve all of Minnesota because we are a Minnesota-based organization. Second part of that answer is that in District 2, I'm not going to name any names, but our representatives don't necessarily agree with us. I know that we held a town hall where we invited our representatives, and our representatives did not show up. So we are working in our district as well as trying to reach out to the rest of Minnesota.
Other questions on this topic? Okay.
So see you downstairs for further conversations. Thank you very much. Oh, you know, I'm here. You want to go downstairs and join the students? That'd be great. Before I open it up to other subjects, I just want to respond to comments that were made yesterday by Representative Anderson saying that because I don't support taking money from the stadium reserve fund, I don't support the new veterans homes. That's just absolutely untruthful. And she knows it because I told her so in the meeting we had a week ago. where I said, you know, you're looking for the wrong place. The State Reserve Fund to take money for veterans homes. She said, well, that's within my agency, within my purview of my committee. And I said, Commissioner Franz said, and we'll continue to repeat that we think the bonding bill is the proper place for that funding, and I will support that and urge the legislature to pass that in the bonding bill. But to say otherwise is knowingly untruthful. So, questions on any subject?
Last night on the floor about the Workers' Compensation Advisory Council and some serious talk about actually abolishing that council because, as was stated, they have failed to do anything about first responders and the issue of PTSD. It came from both sides of the aisle, people espousing that idea of abolishing it. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I think there should be firmer response. I think that it should be recognized for what it is, which is a debilitating disability. You know, that council was set up, I don't know, 30 years ago, almost, because of the constant impasse between business and labor over issues related to workers' comp. And the feeling was it was equally balanced then, and it requires a majority to proceed, that there's a check and balance. Well, there's a lot of check, there's not so much balance anymore, because the business community is opposed to everything as they are with the sexual harassment. You know, just shockingly opposed to things that are clearly in the public interest. And I wonder sometimes whether these business organizations like the Minnesota Chamber, who pretend to represent all businesses, are really speaking for most Minnesota businesses that want safe environments and are responsible for those environments, that want harassment-free workplaces and take responsibility for those. But everything is stymied. So I think it's a committee that whose usefulness needs to be re-examined. I think it's a short time to do it now, but I certainly would urge the next legislature, next governor to take a careful look at it.
Is that to say that you might, I know it's going to be too late for you, but if you had a chance to ring in your choice one way or the other, do you think it should be abolished?
Yes. Well, it should be what?
Do you think it should be abolished?
The committee, I'd have to talk with Commissioner Peterson about that. I don't know. But I do think legislation like that that includes more people. I mean, PTSD now with the medical marijuana and with the knowledge that's been gained since that committee was established, as I believe it's about 30 years ago. I mean, we ought to be incorporating that into our workers' comp. You know, I always say workers' comp, the people who complain about it in the business community or elsewhere, we should abolish it for a year and have every injured worker go find a lawyer and go into court and sue for thousands or millions of dollars in damages, and they would be jumping back into the legislature and asking for workers' comp to be reestablished. It's that beneficial to the orderly functioning of businesses in the state. So to oppose people who are legitimately disabled or impaired by work situations is just against the fundamental spirit of workers' comp legislation.
Governor, I know that you have said that the nitrate fertilizer override, that would elicit a veto from you. The environmental groups were here a day or so ago saying they would like something even stronger than that if they send it to you in an omnibus, that you'll veto it. Are you in a position to say that?
Well, I believe, thanks to Commissioner Frederickson, the nitrate rule has much broader acceptance than it did before in the farm communities. He made some significant revisions. The measures now, first of all, they're targeted on the areas of the state that have the most severe nitrate contamination problems, and they're common sense. I mean, don't pour chemical or animal fertilizer on frozen ground where it's going to just wash out, run off until before the next planting season. So I think it's recognized that it's much more restrained, it's much more in accord with good farming principles, and I'm not aware at this point that there's fierce resistance. That's what I've been told by my staff. Should it go farther? I'm sure that the people will say it did, but I'm thanks greatly to Commissioner Frederickson's credit, who went and had 14, I believe it is, different meetings around the state, talking with those who were upset about the original draft and allaying those concerns and making the appropriate revisions. I will say one thing that's distressing is we had another proposal that with the transfer of a house or farm, that where there's a private well, that well has to be tested for nitrates. And that's been opposed for reasons that I can't comprehend. We have testing for lead, we have testing for other serious impairments, and to say that we're not going to let people find out before they make a purchase what's in their new well, I find just indefensible.
In terms of the original nitrate provisions in the bill, do you anticipate that will probably go away in the negotiation process then? I'm talking about the override of the rule.
The override of the rule.
It's in the House bill, I believe.
The House bill would eliminate the rule, eliminate rulemaking. Well, I would veto that.
Yeah.
I mean, the rule should go ahead. The rule, as I say, is gathered. I'm told, broad support from the farm organizations and the like. There's going to be no reason to have that go into statute. And it's once again an intrusion of the legislative branch into the proper authority of the executive branch. The way it's set up, the legislature passes laws. The state goes through laborious rulemaking processes between 12 and 24 months to institute a new rule. And this rule would go through that kind of process. Goes before administrative law judges, goes through everything you can imagine. And then to say the legislature then has the right afterwards just to roll in and just decide whether or not it's going to happen or not, just negates the whole carefully constructed review process and puts the legislature in a position of running state agencies and managing or mismanaging the executive branch responsibilities to implement the laws that they themselves have passed. And there's several of those in this current legislative session, more than I've seen before. And I opposed every one of them.
So to be clear, you would veto an omnibus bill or megabus bill?
I'm going to end up vetoing omnibus bills if they're going to contain stuff that people know I'm going to oppose.
Even if it's just that one provision, the legislature has to vote to approve a...
Well, if we narrowed it down to one, I'd check the weather report for July. I mean, if we get it down to one, if there's a preponderance of really good, important things to have, that's why I don't want to get into hypotheticals. But the way these omnibus bills, most of them stand right now, they're so littered with policy matters that are unrelated to the budget purposes.
With respect to sort of the crossover between legislative and executive authority, there was a statement in Commissioner Friend's letter saying that he was worried that the way that things were stacking up with respect to the sexual harassment, that there's some provision that they were required, your branch, to investigate all misconduct rather than just sexual harassment, which could stack complaints up to the point of near infinity. What do you have to say about that issue?
Well, I think he's right. I think we need to focus. I'm sure there are other offenses that are deserving of that kind of independent review, but let's take the first step and let's do it right, do it well, and that's deal with sexual harassment complaints and abuses, and then see where it goes from there.
Other questions?
Yeah, Governor, on the tax bills, now that the House and Senate both have their bills out, what are your thoughts on that moving forward?
Well, I want to see them reconcile their differences. I'm not going to get involved debating with the House or debating with the Senate. They need to debate between themselves, set up the conference committee. I assume it'll start sometime next week. The clock's running down. When they convene, there'll be only 2 weeks remaining, which isn't enough time if they're going to include Commissioner Bowerly and my staff to provide feedback in advance, what I can accept and what I can't. But ultimately, we'll get down to serious negotiations after the conference committee is acted, as we will with the other conference committees. I'm not going to negotiate 3 ways. I'll negotiate with the legislative position once it's been established, once it's been passed by the House and Senate.
Governor, does the provider tax, is that a deal breaker if there's not an extension of that and what ultimately comes out of the Congress committee?
There's more than one way to accomplish that goal of making the pharmaceutical industry pay for some of the costs of the epidemic that they've contributed to, and I think Senator Rosen's way of providing a licensing fee that's going to raise $20 million is a perfectly acceptable alternative.
I perhaps wasn't clear. I was referring to the provider tax that sunsets.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That aspect. I was not clear. I apologize.
Well, I put that in there just to be consistent with what I've said, what are principles of good governance, that Minnesota Care for almost 30 years now, over 30 years, has provided incredibly important health care to so many people, and it's in jeopardy because if that provider tax is eliminated, which it will at the end of calendar 2019, the fund is going to drop down to zero very quickly. Next year's legislature will have to face up to that question one way or the other. This year they can avoid it. This year they can play politics with it. I didn't anticipate they'd play the kind of politics they have by pretending that it causes a tax increase. It should be a continuation of the tax, so that doesn't even stand on its own merits. But they know darn well what they're doing, and trying their worst to get away with it. So I don't expect it to go anywhere. I didn't expect it when I put it in, but I'm doing what I think is right for Minnesota now and in the years ahead. And I have no doubt in my mind that's right for Minnesota.
So just so that I'm clear, we're clear, if it were not in there, the extension of it, that would not be a vetoable action.
I'm not going to veto something that's not in there, no.
Everyone good? Thank you.
Thank you.